There are men you can push, and there are men you should never have started with. Dale Hutchins was the second kind. He'd pulled into his own driveway on a Tuesday afternoon to find two men in uniforms blocking his gate, hands up, badges out, voices loud. Except they weren't police. They weren't sheriff's deputies. They were HOA security contractors in costume, sent by one woman who had decided that a retired Army Master Sergeant needed to be reminded who ran this neighborhood. He'd served 3 tours. He'd buried friends. He did not rattle easily. But what Karen didn't know was that Dale hadn't come home alone that afternoon. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you love HOA revenge stories, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next. Dale Hutchins was 58 years old, retired, and finally home. 26 years in the United States Army, 3 combat deployments, 2 commendations, 1 Purple Heart he kept in a drawer and never talked about, had taken him everywhere except where he wanted to be. When he finally hung up his uniform, he didn't want a ceremony or a parade. He wanted 5 acres on the edge of Ridgerest Commons, a modest HOA community in rural Tennessee, where he could build a workshop, keep a garden, and hear nothing louder than wind through the tree line. He bought the property outright, cash, built the perimeter fence himself over 2 weekends, hung an American flag on the porch that had flown over Kandahar. It wasn't fancy, it was earned. He noticed Brenda Collier the first week. HOA president for 8 consecutive years, Brenda moved through Ridgerest Commons with the energy of a woman who had never once been told her authority had limits. Highlighted hair always set, blazer always pressed, a laminated community rulebook she carried like a weapon rather than a document. She welcomed Dale with a firm handshake and an immediate observation that his perimeter fence exceeded the HOA's approved height guidelines by 4 inches and would need to be addressed. Dale nodded, measured the fence himself that evening. She was wrong by 2 inches in her own favor. He let it go. He filed it away. What he didn't know was that Brenda had already decided that a man who built his own fence and flew his own flag was a man who needed to be managed. She just hadn't decided how yet. The first violation notice arrived 3 weeks after Dale moved in. $40 for an unapproved exterior modification. The flagpole mount he'd bolted to the porch railing to fly the Kandahar flag. The notice cited a community bylaw requiring HOA approval for any permanent exterior fixture. Dale had read the bylaws cover to cover the day he signed the purchase agreement. Flagpole mounts were not listed. He wrote a calm, detailed response citing the specific bylaw number and the precise language that excluded his installation from the approval requirement. He included photographs. He mailed it certified. The fine stood. No explanation given. He paid it, filed a copy of everything, and told himself it was a bureaucratic mistake made by someone who hadn't read their own rules carefully enough. He was being charitable. He shouldn't have been. By the 6th week, the notices were arriving every 10 days. A citation for his workshop lighting, visible after 9 p.m., deemed a community nuisance. A warning about his garden border stones, described as creating an unapproved pathway structure. A fine for his truck parked on his own gravel driveway, flagged as an eyesore within community sightlines. Each notice signed personally by Brenda Collier, each one targeting something Dale had built, placed, or owned on his own property. He contacted the HOA board directly, requested a formal hearing, was told the next scheduled meeting was 11 weeks out. He asked for an emergency session given the volume of citations, was told emergency sessions required a majority board vote. 3 of the 5 board members had been serving since Brenda's first term. He called the county property office, was told HOA internal disputes were outside their jurisdiction unless a formal legal complaint was filed. He called a property attorney, was told he had a case, but that HOA litigation moved slowly, 18 months minimum, costs up front. That was when his neighbor Roy stepped in. Roy Dempsey was 71, a former county road commissioner who had lived on the adjacent lot for 16 years. He'd watched 3 families leave Ridgerest Commons under circumstances that looked, from the outside, exactly like what Dale was experiencing. He told Dale one evening over the fence, quietly and without drama, that Brenda had a method. She didn't attack directly, she buried people in paperwork until they either gave in or gave up. The last family before Dale received 22 violation notices in 4 months. They sold inside a year. Dale listened, nodded once, then asked Roy if he documented any of it. Roy went inside and came back with a 3-inch binder. Then came the morning that changed the temperature entirely. Dale returned from his weekly grocery run to find his gate padlocked from the outside. Not his padlock, someone else's. His own lock had been removed and replaced, blocking him from entering his own property. A notice taped to the gate informed him that the HOA had placed a temporary access restriction on his driveway, pending resolution of outstanding violations, a power Dale had never seen cited in any bylaw because it didn't exist in any bylaw. He called the sheriff. A deputy arrived, reviewed the notice, and told Dale the padlock itself was likely illegal, but that forcing entry could complicate a civil case. He suggested Dale pursue it through proper channels. Dale stood at his own gate for 20 minutes, flag visible on the porch, workshop locked up inside. 5 acres of land he'd bought with cash and built with his hands, and he couldn't get to it because a woman with a laminated rule book had decided he needed to be taught a lesson. He called Roy, told him to keep the binder somewhere safe. Then he made a different phone call, a number he hadn't dialed in 4 years, an old unit contact, someone who still had connections, who knew people, who understood exactly what Dale was dealing with. He didn't ask for trouble, he asked for company. What showed up 3 days later on Dale Hutchins' private road was not what Brenda Collier had planned. Dale hadn't planned a scene. He'd simply invited some old friends for the weekend. 14 veterans from his former unit, men he'd served with across 3 deployments, men who had eaten dust and kept promises in places most people would never see, arrived Friday evening in a convoy that was entirely legal, entirely civilian, and entirely impossible to ignore. 4 pickup trucks, 2 modified SUVs, and a decommissioned military green Jeep that still had the unit insignia on the door. Every man with honorable discharge papers, every vehicle registered and road legal. They parked along Dale's private road, set up camp chairs on his 5 acres, and spent Friday evening the way veterans do, quietly, around a fire, with coffee and very few words. Saturday morning, Brenda had arranged her own production. She had hired 2 private security contractors, men in dark uniforms with HOA security printed across the chest in bold letters, and positioned them at Dale's gate before 7 a.m. She arrived behind them in her silver sedan, rule book in hand, with 2 board members in tow. The plan, as she had apparently communicated to at least one neighbor the evening before, was to present Dale with a formal notice of escalated violations and photograph the property for a civil filing. What she had not planned for was 14 veterans standing in a relaxed line behind Dale when she arrived. She had not planned for Roy, who had called 7 neighbors the night before, or for those neighbors standing on the road with coffee and phones already recording. Brenda's contractors stepped forward, said nothing of consequence, looked at the 14 men behind Dale, then at each other, then back at Brenda. They stepped aside. Brenda held her ground for a moment, rulebook clutched, chin up, then tried to redirect. She announced to the assembled crowd that the HOA had documented authority to restrict driveway access pending unresolved violations, and that Dale's guests represented an unauthorized gathering under community assembly guidelines. Dale handed Roy a folder. Roy opened it and held it up. 14 pages of the community bylaws, every assembly clause highlighted, and every word of her argument absent from every page. Then Brenda made the mistake that finished her. Flustered, voice climbing, she pointed at Dale's Kandahar flag and told the crowd that the flag itself was the source of the original dispute, that she had received complaints from multiple residents about its display and had documented those complaints in the HOA record, and that everything that followed had been proper procedure.
3 of the neighbors on the road raised their hands. None of them had complained. None of them had ever been contacted. One of them had a 14-year-old son who had told Dale's flag story at school. She had just admitted in front of witnesses and phone cameras that the entire campaign had been driven by a complaint record she had apparently fabricated. Roy closed the folder slowly. The contractors walked back to their vehicle and did not return. The neighbors didn't leave when Brenda did. They stayed, introduced themselves to Dale's unit brothers, brought out more coffee. A woman 3 lots down, someone Dale had only ever waved at, told him she'd been afraid to hang a wind chime on her porch for 2 years because of a citation she'd received for an unapproved exterior decoration. A retired teacher from the north end of the community said he removed a vegetable garden after receiving 4 consecutive warnings. They hadn't fought back. They hadn't known they could. Roy submitted the 3-inch binder to the county property board the following Monday. Dale's attorney filed a formal complaint the same day, citing fabricated complaint records, unlawful driveway access restriction, and a pattern of targeted harassment. The HOA's own insurance carrier requested an internal audit within 2 weeks of the filing. Apparently, Brenda had used HOA funds to pay the security contractors without board approval. The board voted to remove her 31 days after the Saturday morning standoff. The margin was 4-1. Brenda cast the one dissenting vote herself, which the board chair noted for the record with the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting a long time to note it. The fabricated complaint records were removed from the HOA file. Every fine issued to Dale in the preceding 3 months was reversed and refunded. He removed the padlock from his gate, the one Brenda had installed, and dropped it in the trash without ceremony. His flag still flies. The workshop light stays on as late as he wants. Roy comes by most Saturdays now, binder retired, just 2 neighbors sharing a fence line, the way neighbors are supposed to. Dale has no regrets. He didn't raise his voice once. He just made a phone call to men who had never once let him stand alone. Here's what I want to know. Leave it in the comments. If someone used fake authority to block you from your own property, what would your phone call have looked like? If you enjoyed watching karma work, smash that like button and subscribe. I post new HOA revenge stories every week. Comment below. Have you ever dealt with a Karen like this?